I never should have bought this place. That's what I tell myself now, lying awake at night with a loaded shotgun across my lap, jumping at every creak and groan of this old mansion. But how could I have known? How could anyone have predicted what would happen to me here in these woods? My name is Eliza Winters. 3 months ago, I was celebrating my divorce from Richard with a bottle of expensive champagne and the deed to this beautiful Victorian mansion nestled deep in the Cascade Mountains. It seemed perfect then. 5 acres of pristine forest. A gorgeous 3-story home with bay windows and a wraparound porch. And most importantly, blessed solitude. After 15 years of marriage to a man who gradually drained every drop of my identity, I craved isolation like a drug. "You're making a mistake," my sister Claire had warned over the phone. "Nobody lives that far out in the woods alone, especially not someone who's spent their whole life in the city." I'd laughed at her concern. "I'm 36, not 86. I can handle a little wilderness. Besides, the real estate agent said there's a small town just 20 minutes down the mountain. I'll have everything I need." What the real estate agent failed to mention was why the previous owners had left so suddenly, or why the price had been slashed to nearly half its market value. I was too enchanted by the prospect of reinvention to ask the right questions. The first few weeks were blissful. I set up my writing studio in the east-facing sunroom, started a small vegetable garden in the overgrown backyard, and spent evenings on the porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset filter through ancient pines. The isolation that had worried my sister became my sanctuary. The only sounds were birdsong, wind through the trees, and the occasional distant howl that sent delicious shivers down my spine. I remember the exact moment everything changed. It was a Tuesday evening in late September. The air had turned crisp, with the first hint of autumn, and I'd built a fire in the massive stone fireplace that dominated the living room. I was curled up with a book when I heard it. A strange huffing sound just outside the bay window. At first, I thought it was the wind, but something about the rhythm made the hair on my arm stand up. When I pulled back the curtain, I found myself staring directly into the eyes of the largest grizzly bear I had ever seen. Not that I'd seen many. My wildlife experience was largely limited to squirrels in Central Park, but this creature was enormous. It stood on its hind legs, easily 8 feet tall, with a dish-shaped face and small, intelligent eyes that locked onto mine with unsettling focus. Gasped and stumbled backward, dropping my wine glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, splashing red liquid like blood across my bare feet. The bear didn't move. It just watched me. Not with the casual curiosity I might have expected from a wild animal, but with an intensity that felt almost human. Almost hungry, but not for food. After what seemed like an eternity, it dropped to all fours and lumbered away into the darkness. I spent the rest of the night with all the lights on, doors double-checked, windows secured. I told myself it was a fluke encounter, that bears were common in these mountains, that it would move on to wherever bears go when they're not terrifying, divorced writers in remote mansions. I was wrong. So terribly, catastrophically wrong. The next morning, I found massive paw prints circling the entire house, as if the creature had been methodically checking every possible entrance. The garden I'd so carefully tended was trampled, but oddly, none of the vegetables had been eaten. This wasn't a hungry bear looking for food. This was something else entirely. I called the local ranger station and described what I'd seen. The man, who answered, sounded bored. "Ma'am, bears are active this time of year, fattening up for winter. Just make sure your trash is secured and don't leave food outside. It'll move on." But it didn't try to get into my trash, I insisted. It was looking at me through the window. For several minutes, there was a pause on the line. "Well, that's unusual behavior," he admitted, "but not unheard of. Bears are curious creatures. Still, maybe invest in some bear spray if you're concerned." Bear spray. As if a canister of spicy air would protect me from 2,000 pounds off her. Muscle and claws if it decided to come through my wall. Still, I followed his advice. The next day, I drove the winding mountain road into the small town of Pinecrest. It was exactly what you'd expect. A single main street lined with weathered buildings, a general store that doubled as the post office, and a bar that seemed to be the social center of the community. I felt eyes on me as I parked my Subaru outside, the general store. Newcomers were obviously a rarity. The store was cramped but surprisingly well stocked. I found bear spray easily enough. Apparently I wasn't the first person to need it, and added a few heavy-duty locks for good measure. As the elderly shopkeeper rang up my purchases, I decided to ask about my visitor. "I had a rather large bear outside my house last night," I said casually. "Is that common around here?" The man's gnarled hands paused on the register. "Where exactly is your place?" "The old Victorian up on Black Ridge Road, about 5 miles from the turnoff." Something flickered across his face. Recognition and something else. Concern? Fear? He quickly masked it with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, the Mercer place. Beautiful home." "It's the Winters place now," I corrected, a surge of pride in my new identity momentarily overshadowing my concern. "Of course." He bagged my items slowly. "Bears are part of life up here, Ms. Winters, but they generally keep to themselves unless provoked." This one seemed different. It was watching me through the window. He handed me my change without meeting. My eyes. "Might want to stop by Rusty's across the street before heading back up the mountain. Good to know the locals if you're living out that way alone." It was clearly a dismissal, and something in his tone made me decide not to press further. Instead, I followed his suggestion and headed to Rusty's Bar and Grill, telling myself a late lunch would be nice before the drive back. The bar fell silent when I walked in, an actual cliched moment of quiet, as every flannel-clad patron turned to stare at the outsider. I nearly turned around and left, but stubbornness, the same quality that had led me to buy a remote mansion in the first place, propelled me to a corner booth instead. A waitress with tired eyes and a name tag reading Donna brought me a menu without being asked. "You're the one who bought the Mercer place," she said. It wasn't a question. "News travels fast," I replied, trying for friendly but landing somewhere near defensive. "Small town." She shrugged. "What can I get you?" I ordered a burger and a beer, more to have a reason to stay and observe than from actual hunger. The bar slowly returned to its normal volume as the novelty of my presence wore off, conversations resuming in hushed tones. I sipped my beer and tried to look casual while straining to hear what the men at the bar were discussing. "Third one this decade," an older man with a silver beard was saying. "You'd think people would learn?" "City folks," his companion replied, shaking his head. "They don't understand these woods." "It's not right, selling that place without telling the whole story," a third man chimed in. "Those Mercers barely made it out alive. And now this poor woman." "Keep your voice down, Earl," the bearded man hissed, glancing in my direction. I quickly looked away, pretending to be fascinated by the faded photographs on the wall. My food arrived, and I ate mechanically, my appetite diminished by the fragments of conversation I'd overheard. As I was paying my bill, I heard something that made my blood freeze. "Bears up in those parts have always had a thing for women," a gravelly voice said from the bar. "Something about the scent drives them crazy, not like normal bears at all." Laughter followed, but it had an uneasy edge to it. I left money on the table and hurried out, feeling the weight of stares on my back. In my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself that I'd misheard, or that it was just locals trying to scare Thessity girl with tall tales. But as I drove back up the mountain, the forest pressing close on either side of the narrow road, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somewhere in those dense woods, something was waiting for me to return. I arrived home just as dusk was settling, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. The house loomed against the darkening sky, suddenly seeming less charming and more ominous with its peeling paint and shuttered windows. I sat in my car for several minutes, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just the wind, stirring branches and the first stars appearing overhead. "Get a grip, Eliza," I muttered to myself. "It's just a bear. A normal, ordinary bear that will move on to bother someone else." I grabbed my purchases and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. That night, installed the new locks on every door and window, checked and rechecked them, and placed the bear spray on my bedside table. I told myself I was being prudent, not paranoid. The scratching started around midnight. At first it was so faint I thought I'd imagined it, a gentle scraping sound from somewhere downstairs. I lay rigid in my bed, straining to hear over the pounding of my heart. There it was again, more insistent this time. Scratch, 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 like Clausen wood. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers and turned on the flashlight. The bear spray was where I'd left it, small comfort though it was. The scratching continued, moving from the back door to what sounded like the kitchen window. It was testing the entrances. I crept to my bedroom door and eased it open, listening. The old house had excellent acoustics. Sound traveled clearly through the heating vents and up the central staircase. What I heard next wasn't scratching, but a deliberate thump. Then another. Something large was pressing against the back door, testing its strength. My breath caught in my throat. I should call someone, the ranger station, the police, anyone. But who would arrive in time? I was miles from help, alone with Hog, whatever wastering to get into my home. The thumping stopped abruptly. Silence stretched, more terrifying than the noise had been. Had it given up? Gone away? I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Then came a new sound that turned my blood to ice. The distinct creak of floorboards on the back porch. Slow, heavy steps moving toward the side of the house, toward the bay, window in the living room where it had seen me before. I had to see it, had to know for certain what was out there. Moving on autopilot, I crept down the stairs, bear spray clutched in my white-knuckled grip. The living room was bathed in moonlight, filtering through the curtains I'd forgotten to close. I approached the window on trembling legs, every instinct screaming at me to run back upstairs, to hide, to pretend this wasn't happening. Instead, I reached out and pulled back the curtain just enough to peer outside. The bear was there, massive and dark against the silver-lit lawn. But it wasn't looking at the house. It was looking directly at the window, at me, as if it had known exactly where I would appear. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I knew with bone-deep certainty that this was no ordinary animal. There was recognition in those small, dark eyes, intelligence, purpose. It rose slowly to its hind legs, towering in the moonlight, and placed one massive paw against the glass. The window creaked under its weight, and I stumbled backward with a strangled cry. The bear didn't move, didn't try to break through. It just watched me, paw pressed against the barrier between us, like a grotesque parody of a lover's touch. I ran, then, scrambling back upstairs to my bedroom where I barricaded the door with a dresser and huddled in the corner until dawn broke. The bear was gone by morning, but it had left its mark. Deep scratches in the wooden siding, a partially destroyed porch railing, and paw prints in the soft earth below my bedroom window, as if it had stood there for hours, looking up at where I hid. I should have left that day, packed my belongings and fled back to the safety of the city. Sometimes I torture myself imagining that alternate reality, where I'm sipping coffee in a cramped apartment, laughing about my brief, failed experiment. In country living, instead, I convinced myself I could handle the situation. I was Eliza Winters, newly independent woman, not about to be chased from her dream home by local wildlife, no matter how persistent. I drove back to town and bought lumber to repair the porch. I found a hardware store in the next town over and purchased motion-activated floodlights to install around the property. I even ordered an air horn online. Reading that loud noises could scare bears away. For 3 days, there was no sign of my unwelcome admirer. The forest was quiet, the nights uneventful. I began to relax, to think perhaps the bear had moved on after all. I resumed my writing, worked in what remained of my garden, and tried to recapture the peace I'd found in those first weeks. On the 4th night, I woke to the sound of breaking glass. It was in the house. The sound of shattering glass jolted me from sleep like an electric shock. For a moment, I lay paralyzed, hoping it was a dream or perhaps a branch fallen against a window. Then came the unmistakable sound of heavy movement downstairs. A thud, the creak off floorboards protesting under significant weight, the scrape of claws on hardwood. It had broken in. It was inside my home. My mouth went dry with terror. The bedroom door was barricaded, but would a dresser stop a determined grizzly? My phone lay on the nightstand, and I reached for it with trembling fingers, trying to remember if I had any cell service this far up the mountain. The screen lit up. No bars. Of course. The landline was downstairs in the kitchen, where it was. More sounds from below. A crash that must have been the coffee table, glass tinkling as picture frames fell from walls. It was moving through the living room, heading toward the stairs. Toward me. I slid silently from the bed, grabbing the bear spray and backing toward the ensuite bathroom. If I could lock myself in there, put another barrier between us. But what then? Wait until it broke through that door too? I needed a weapon. Something more substantial than spray. My eyes fell on the decorative fireplace poker I'd hung on the wall as an aesthetic touch, never intending to use it. I snatched it down, the heavy iron cold and reassuring in my grip. Not that it would do much against a grizzly, but it was better than nothing. The noises downstairs had stopped. The silence was worse, much worse. Was it listening, trying to locate me? Did it know I was upstairs? I held my breath, straining to hear any movement. The first stair creaked under its weight. Oh God, it was coming up. Deliberately, methodically climbing the stairs to the 2nd floor, to my bedroom. I backed into the bathroom, closing the door as quietly as possible, and turning the lock with agonizing slowness to avoid any sound. The small window above the clawfoot tube offered a potential escape, but it was narrow, designed for ventilation, not for a terrified woman fleeing a bear. And even if I could squeeze through, it was a 15-foot drop to the ground below. Another creak, closer now. It was on the landing. I could hear its breathing, heavy and rhythmic, as it paused outside my bedroom door. The dresser I'd pushed against. It suddenly seemed laughably inadequate. A low, rumbling sound vibrated through the walls. Not quite a growl, something deeper and more purposeful. Then came the first impact against my bedroom door. The wood groaned. Another impact, harder this time. The sound of splintering wood, the scrape of the dresser being pushed across the floor. I climbed into the bathtub, poker clutched to my chest, eyes fixed on the bathroom door. My entire body was shaking so violently I could barely remain standing. This couldn't be happening. Bears don't hunt people. They don't break into houses and pursue specific targets. They don't. The bedroom door gave way with a crash that seemed to shake the entire house. I heard the dresser topple, drawers spilling, their contents across the floor. Heavy footsteps crossed my bedroom, pausing at the bathroom door. A snuffling sound, then a gentle scratch. Almost polite, as if it was knocking. "Go away," I screamed, my voice breaking with terror. "Leave me alone." The scratching stopped. For one wild moment, I thought it might actually listen, might turn and lumber back downstairs and out of my life. Then the door exploded inward. The bear filled the doorframe, larger than seemed possible in the confined space. Its fur was dark, almost black in the dim light. its eyes reflecting the faint moonlight from the window. Those eyes found mine immediately, with that same unsettling intelligence I'd seen before. It took a step into the bathroom. I raised the poker with shaking hands. "Stay back," I warned, as if reasoning with it would help. "I'll hurt you if I have to." It paused, head tilting slightly as if considering my words. Then it moved forward again, deliberate, unstoppable. I swung the poker wildly, connecting with its shoulder. It might as well have been a toothpick for all the effect it had. The bear didn't even flinch. I fumbled for the bear spray, pointing it directly at its face and depressing the trigger. The spray hissed out, creating a cloud between us. The bear backed up a step, shaking its massive head and snorting. I used the moment to lunge for the door, desperate to get past it, to find some escape route. I almost made it. My shoulder brushed past its flank, the doorway just ahead of me. Then a paw the size of a dinner plate swiped out, catching me across the back and sending me sprawling onto the bedroom floor. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs. I tried to crawl away, gasping for breath, but a weight pressed down on my back, pinning me to the floor. The bear's hot breath stirred my hair. I could feel its muzzle against my neck, inhaling deeply as if memorizing my scent. This was it. I was going to die here, alone in this house that was supposed to represent my fresh start, but the killing bite never came. Instead, the pressure on my back shifted as the bear moved its weight. Before I could react, I felt myself being lifted. The bear's jaws closed around the back of my shirt and pajama pants, holding me as carefully as a mother cat might carry a kitten. The indignity and sheer surrealism of the situation momentarily overwhelmed my terror. I was being carried by a grizzly bear through my own house. It moved with surprising grace, navigating the stairs without bumping me against the walls, crossing the destroyed living room and out through the shattered French doors that had been its sentry point. The cool night air hit my face as we emerged onto the lawn. I should fight, I thought distantly, should struggle, scream, do something. But shock had settled over me like a heavy blanket, muffling my responses. This couldn't be real. People don't get abducted by bears. The forest closed around us, branches brushing against my dangling limbs as the bear carried me deeper into the wilderness. The moonlight filtered through the canopy in patches, illuminating our bizarre procession in flashes of silver. I had no idea how far it raveled. Time had become meaningless, reality distorted by fear and disbelief. Eventually, the trees thinned, and we approached what appeared to be a rocky outcropping on the side of the mountain. The bear ducked into an opening I hadn't noticed, the entrance to a cave. Darkness enveloped us, absolute and disorienting. The air turned cool and damp, with an underlying musk of animal den. The bear finally set me down on what felt like a nest of sorts, softer than the stone floor, composed of what I would later discover was a disturbing collection of fabric. Some of it was clearly gathered from human sources. A tattered blanket, what might have once been clothing. Had there been others before me? I lay where I was placed, too terrified to move, listening to the bear's movements in the darkness. It seemed to be arranging itself nearby, its massive body blocking the cave entrance, my only escape route. The message was clear. I wasn't going anywhere. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and I fell into a fitful sleep. I dreamed of running through endless forest, always pursued, never escaping. I awoke to dim light filtering into the cave and the sensation of something wet against my hand. For a disoriented moment, I thought I was home in bed with my ex-husband's dog, licking my fingers as he sometimes did to wake me. Reality crashed back as I opened my eyes to find the bear methodically licking my right hand, its massive tongue moving between my fingers with disturbing gentleness. I yanked my hand away with a cry of revulsion, scrambling backward until my spine pressed against the cave wall. The bear watched me with those intelligent eyes, making no move to pursue. It seemed patient, as if it had all the time in the world, as if I was exactly where it wanted me to be. That first day in captivity established a pattern that would continue. The bear would leave for hours at a time, hunting, I assumed, always careful to block the cave entrance with rocks and branches. Before departing, I would frantically search for escape routes, finding none that didn't require squeezing through gaps too small for my human frame. When it returned, it often brought food, berries, occasionally fish. It would place these offerings before me and watch expectantly. Hunger eventually forced me to accept these gifts, though each one felt like a surrender, an acknowledgement of my dependence. And always, there was the licking. It seemed fixated on my hands and feet, waiting until I was asleep or too exhausted to resist before beginning its meticulous grooming. I came to dread the sensation of that rough tongue between my fingers and toes, not painful, but deeply violating. There was something ritualistic about it, something that spoke of obsession rather than predatory intent. I tried to keep track of days by scratching marks on the cave wall with a sharp stone, but time began to blur. My clothes grew filthy, my body weak from inadequate nutrition and the constant stress of captivity. I talked to myself constantly, afraid that silence would erode what remained of my sanity. "This isn't normal bear behavior," I would mutter, pacing the small confines of my prison when the bear was away. Bears don't take prisoners. They don't collect people. I remembered the fragments of conversation I'd overheard at the bar. Bears up in those parts have always had a thing for women. Not folklore after all, but warning. How many others had there been? Had they all been taken to this cave, subjected to this strange captivity? Had any escaped? That thought became my lifeline. The possibility of escape. I began to conserve my strength, forcing myself to eat the bear's offerings, to rest when possible. I studied its patterns, noting that its absences grew longer as autumn deepened. Preparing for winter, I realized. Fattening up for hibernation. What would happen to me when winter came? Would I be expected to hibernate alongside it in this cave? The thought was unbearable. My opportunity came on what I estimated was my 10th day of captivity. The bear had been gone since dawn, longer than usual. The branches blocking the entrance seemed carefully arranged, as if it had been in a hurry. I worked at them methodically, ignoring the pain in my licked raw hands, until I created an opening barely wide enough to squeeze through. Outside, the forest was ablaze with autumn colors, the beauty a shocking contrast to the dank darkness of the cave. I had no idea which direction would lead to civilization, to my house, to safety. The mountain sloped downward to my right, and I chose that path, reasoning that downhill would eventually lead to roads, to people. I was desperately weak. My legs trembled with each step, unused to supporting my weight after days of confinement. But fear was a powerful motivator. I imagined the bear returning to find its captive gone, its rage, its pursuit. I pushed myself forward, stumbling over roots and rocks, using trees for support when my strength faltered. The forest seemed to close in around me, identical in every direction. Had I passed that distinctive pine before? Was I walking in circles? Panic threatened to overwhelm me several times, but I forced it down. Panic would kill me as surely as the bear. I found a stream and followed it downhill, stopping to drink and splash water on my filthy face. My reflection in a calm pool was shocking. Hollow-cheeked, wild-eyed, hair matted with dirt and leaves. I barely recognized myself. The sun was setting when I heard it, a distant huffing sound that sent ice through my veins. It had found my absence and was tracking me. Bears have an incredible sense of smell. Of course it would follow my scent. Abandoned caution and ran, crashing through underbrush. no longer caring about the noise I made. My only thought was distance, putting as much of it as possible between myself and my pursuer. My foot caught on an exposed root, and I went down hard, pain lancing through my ankle. Not broken, I didn't think, but sprained. I tried to stand and nearly screamed as weight fell on the injured joint. The huffing sound was closer now. I dragged myself forward on hands and knees, then pulled myself upright using a tree trunk, forcing my injured ankle to cooperate. Each step was agony, but the alternative was unthinkable. Night fell, making the forest a maze of shadows. I kept moving, guided now only by the downward slope and blind determination. The sounds of pursuit faded, then returned, then faded again. Was I losing it, or was it circling, trying to cut me off? I don't know how long I stumbled through that darkness. Hours blurred together in a haze of pain and fear. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, I emerged from the tree line to find myself on the edge of a familiar clearing. My house stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky, windows dark and empty, the broken French doors gaping like a wound. I had somehow, miraculously, found my way back. I limped across the lawn, expecting at any moment to feel claws at my back. The house was as I'd left it, furniture overturned, glass crunching underfoot, the evidence of violence everywhere. I made my way to the kitchen, found the landline still working, and called the only number I could think of, the local sheriff's office. "Please," I sobbed into the receiver when a sleepy-sounding deputy answered. "There's a bear. It took me. It kept me in a cave. It's after me. Please send help." There was a pause, then, "Ma'am, is this Eliza Winters? From the old Mercer place?" "Yes," I gasped. "Please hurry." "Stay inside, Ms. Winters. Lock whatever doors you can. We'll be there as soon as possible." I hung up and dragged a heavy cabinet in front of the broken French doors. Not enough to stop the bear, but it might slow it down. Then I remembered what I'd seen mounted in the wall of the den when I first toured the house. A hunting rifle left by some previous owner, more decoration than weapon. I'd left it there, never imagining I'd have use for it. The rifle was still mounted above the fireplace. I took it down with shaking hands, checking to see if it was loaded. It was. I had never fired a gun in my life, but desperation is an excellent teacher. I positioned myself in the den, with a clear view of both the barricaded French doors and the front entrance, and waited. The deputy had said they would come as soon as possible, but possible was relative when you lived 5 miles up, a mountain on a private road. It could be an hour or more before help arrived. I had to survive until then. I don't know how long I sat there, rifle trained on the doors, every muscle tense with anticipation. Long enough that when the sound finally came, a heavy thud against the front door, I almost welcomed it. The waiting was over. One way or another, this would end tonight. The front door shuddered under another impact. The wood around the lock began to splinter. I raised the rifle to my shoulder, trying to remember what I'd seen in movies. Aim for center mass. Squeeze. Don't pull the trigger. The door gave way with a crash, and there it was, my captor, my tormentor. Larger than I remembered, filling the doorframe completely. Our eyes met across the distance, and I saw recognition there, and something like betrayal. As if I had broken some unspoken pact between us. I fired. The recoil slammed the rifle butt into my shoulder, the sound deafening in the confined space. I had aimed for the bear's chest, but my inexperience and shaking hands sent the bullet wide, splintering the doorframe beside its head. The bear didn't flee as I'd hoped. Instead, it charged, moving with shocking speed, for something so large. I worked the bolt to chamber another round, fired again as it crossed the living room. This shot caught it in the shoulder, drawing a roar of pain and rage, but not slowing its advance. I scrambled backward, trying to put the heavy oak desk between us, My injured ankle gave way, and I fell, the rifle clattering across the floor out of reach. The bear loomed over me, blood matting the fur of its wounded shoulder, eyes fixed on mine with that terrible intelligence. This was it. I had failed. After everything, the captivity, the escape, the desperate flight through the forest, I would die here, in the house that was supposed to be my sanctuary. The bear lowered its head toward me, and I closed my eyes, unwilling to watch the end come. I felt its hot breath on my face, smelled the wild musk of its fur. The gunshot was so unexpected I thought for a moment I had imagined it. The bear's body jerked violently, a spray of warm liquid hitting my face. I opened my eyes to see it staggering, sideways, a bloom of red spreading across its chest. "Ms. Winters, move away from it!" A man's voice, unfamiliar. I looked past the wounded bear to see a uniformed deputy in the doorway, service weapon trained on the animal. I rolled to the side, putting the desk between myself and the bear, just as the deputy fired again. The bear roared, the sound filled with pain and fury. It turned toward this new threat, gathering itself to charge despite its wounds. The deputy fired a third time, and the bear stumbled, front legs buckling. It tried to rise, failed, then collapsed onto the hardwood floor with a crash that seemed to shake the foundations of the house. It wasn't dead. I could see its sides heaving with labored breaths, hear the wet rattle in its throat. Its eyes found mine one last time, and what I saw there would haunt me forever. Not anger or pain, but something horribly like devotion. The deputy approached, cautiously, weapon still trained on the fallen animal. "Are you hurt, Ms. Winters?" I couldn't answer. Shock, relief, and lingering terror had robbed me of speech. I could only stare at the creature that had held me captive, that had treated me, not as prey, but as some twisted object of affection. The bear's breathing slowed, then stopped. Its eyes remained open, fixed on me even in death. More deputies arrived, then paramedics. I was wrapped in blankets, examined, questioned. Yes, I had been taken by the bear. Yes, kept in a cave. No, not physically injured beyond the sprained ankle and minor scratches. No, I couldn't explain why it had taken me rather than killed me. "It happens up here sometimes," one of the older deputies said quietly when he thought I couldn't hear. "Bears getting fixated on women. Never seen one take a captive before, though. Usually they just stalk, maybe break in. This one was different." "Should have warned her," another replied. "Selling that place to a woman living alone." I was taken to the small regional hospital, treated for dehydration, minor injuries, and the beginning stages of shock. My sister Claire flew out from New York, her "I told you so" mercifully unspoken, as she helped me pack what remained of my belongings. The mansion sold for far less than I'd paid, even with the motivated seller discount I'd originally received. I didn't care. I would have given it away, just to be free of it, of the memories, of the lingering scent of wild animal that seemed embedded in the walls. I live in the city again now, in a high-rise apartment with triple-locked doors and windows that open only enough to let in air, not intruders. I'm writing again, though the subject matter has changed. No more romance novels. Now I write horror. Stories about the wilderness, about the thin veneer of civilization, about what happens when the natural order is perverted by unnatural obsession. Sometimes, in my dreams, I'm back in that cave. I feel the weight of watching eyes, the sensation of a rough tongue between my fingers. I wake gasping, checking locks, reassuring myself that I'm safe, that it's over. But in the darkest hours of night, when the city sleeps and silence presses close, I wonder, was it truly the only one of its kind? Or are there others out there in the remote woods, watching through windows, waiting for the right woman to fixate upon? And I wonder about the bear itself. What twisted instinct drove it to take me rather than kill me? What did it want from me, ultimately? Some questions have no answers, and perhaps that's for the best. All I know is this: I will never again live anywhere without neighbors within screaming distance. I will never again dismiss local warnings as superstition or folklore. And I will never, ever return to those mountains, where something in the wilderness learned to love in the most horrifying way possible.